I'm going to speak about augmenting sstate-cache with ccache. I would shortly remind you I'm from Incredibuild. We do build acceleration, and we come to Yocto and Bitbake and ask ourselves, what else can we do with that? So I would skip that because I think that you already had my introduction yesterday. Yesterday I had a talk about breaking down the Bitbake build on the process level, and I told you that in a way it relates to a movie that I was recently watching, the Everything Everywhere All at Once. Today I'm going to speak about caching, and this reminds me another old movie, not a recent one, a movie from 2005 about a French family who appears to be watched somehow. And I don't know, but it reminds me of caching, and the name of the film is Cache. The critics, by the way, one of the critics said about this movie that it is like Hitchcock, only creepier, which I don't know. In a way, I don't know why, what is the reason, but in a way it also associates give me some associations with caching in a way, like, yeah, it works in almost always, but not always. So yeah, it is creepier occasionally. So let's put that aside and talk about caching. So I think you all probably know that there are only two hard things in computer science: caching validation and naming things. Well, in fact, I think that I read somewhere that there are two hard problems in computer science: caching validation, naming things, and off by one errors. So we're going to speak today about caching validation, and how can cache assist us, and do we need more than a single cache system or an additional cache mechanism on top of an existing one? So again, the art of shamelessly stealing slides from the introduction talk given on the first day of the conference. This is the basic of sstate. Sstate catches the calls for specific tasks and checks whether this task can be, instead of running the task, can I use existing artifacts from the sstate cache. As you can see, it is quite broad. I mean, it catches all sorts of tasks, from packaging to things that at the end are installations. So it catches the high level of things, and by that it can assist us in shortening the build time by seeing that an entire recipe is already done, or we can use something that was already built. It is much more powerful than just cache for compilations, and it is based on smart checksum mechanism on inputs. You can see in the links. I would not go through that, but you can see that just taking a checksum of a specific file or a specific input is not enough, because in some cases maybe the specific file or input came from another location and we want to ignore some of the information, because at the end we still have the same artifact, even though the initial input was not or does not seem to be the same, and yet it is the same. So if our cache is a bit too strict, it might be that we would lose the opportunity to use some artifacts, and sstate takes account of that and has a powerful and smart checksum mechanism. When we consider sstate, there are some hiccups that we need to be aware of. Like, for example, if we have recipes that do not define correctly the dependencies, it might cause either too much work, or worse, we may use something as seem to be the correct artifact, well, while it is not, which is, of course, very problematic. Also, we may have a corrupted state if the build was terminated forcefully or by an error, like, for example, out of memory error. We read about that in forums. We see that with customers that we work with. So sstate works very good, but in some cases, you may find an issue, and then it is either something that you have to take care of, like go to your recipe and understand that you did something wrong. By the way, as long as you rely on the recipes that come with Yocto, you are fine. They are done in a proper manner. But once you go to yours, yeah, it might be that you did something wrong. Trying to share a state cache between hosts running different Linux distros. Even if it's said to work, it may not. I think this also is a bullet coming from the intro session. So, and I think that we may tackle additional hiccups. So if it doesn't work, I mean, if your build is terminated because of issues, or you get something that doesn't work, then usually what you would like to do is to invalidate the cache. I mean, you would say, okay, maybe something is wrong. Let's try it like as a clean build. Let's talk a bit about the different cache or different cache folders that we have in Yocto. So we have the downloads. The downloads are also some kind of a cache. I mean, we do not want to download something that we downloaded already. We have the sstate-cache folder. We have the temp folder where we have all the output. And we also have the cache for the bitbake parser. So what we focus here in this talk is about the sstate-cache, but when you clean things, in some cases you clean too much, or maybe you do need to clean, you also clean the downloads, and we would talk about, there are several clean methods or clean tasks that you should be aware of, and make sure that you clean what you want and not too much, not too little. If something is not built correctly, you may check the artifact or why the artifact was not fetched from the state. So there are relevant comments for asking bitbake, what was the different signature that you saw on different artifacts or different inputs? And again, we have several links that you can browse later on from the presentation as that explain these comments. When you want to invalidate the cache, and again, it might be because the build is broken, or you know that you did something big and you say, I want to be on the safe side. Usually it's not a good idea to always invalidate the cache. Don't do that. Use the cache. But if you see the need, then you have the do clean command, and the do clean command removes all output files from the target, from the unpack, and it doesn't, running this task does not remove the sstate-cache files. Now, I think that the reason is that, I don't know, many developers feel safe when they clean. I mean, it didn't work, something wrong, let's do clean. And I think that, in a way, Yocto decided, well, let's allow you to do clean and still preserve the state, because otherwise you would suffer from a very long build. So, okay, you clean, I mean, you remove the artifact, but sstate is still there. So you start a new build, but you still use sstate. If you do clean all, then it removes all output files, shows the sstate, and also the downloaded files. So be aware, usually you do not want to clean all. Don't go for, oh, I used do clean, and then I realized it doesn't remove the state, then I do the clean all. Wait, you are just wasting time on downloading again. You have the clean state, which is, I guess, something that you may want if you want to clean the state and keep the download folder. Controlling the cache on the recipe level is also something that you can do, and there are several commands for that, either by configuring the recipe itself or from outside of the recipe. So we have here two links that you can use in order to browse about this option. And always, you can just go and delete the folders. I know that many developers, when something doesn't work, they just go and delete folders. So you can delete the build temp folder, and the manual says that if you delete the build temp folder, it might be, or you should also completely remove the sstate-cache directory. But the idea is that you should do that if you indeed wanted to remove sstate. I mean, it is perfectly okay to remove the build temp, which say, okay, I just want to throw away the artifacts that were built because something is wrong, and I still want to check maybe sstate is legal. Maybe the state in sstate is fine before I just remove it. So deleting just build temp is something reasonable. Even though the manual say you should also completely remove, I would say you should consider removing the sstate-cache. If you do not do that, so be aware that you would get things from sstate. You would just not get things that were built during your last build cycle. There is here also a link to Stack Overflow discussing this issue. And again, going to the folders is something that we see developers do. An advice from an old version of the manual that I do not see in the current version of the manual. So I don't know whether this advice is not relevant anymore, or maybe it is considered bad practice. But in some cases, you go and change something small just to make sure that a recipe would be built or a file would be compiled, just because you saw that it is taken from the sstate-cache, and you do not want to delete the sstate-cache. You just want this file or this recipe or this portion to be rebuilt. So yeah, this is something that as developers, we always know that we can go and touch the file, or touch would not assist us because it's a checksum at the end. So we need to change something that would affect the checksum. And I have here the link to this advice from the 2.4. I didn't see this advice in later revisions, later versions of the manual, but I think that the advice is still valid. If somebody else knows that something is wrong, or that this is a bad practice, you can comment in the chat. Is there any case where I should delete the temp cache? I mean, the cache of the bitbake parser? Well, I did find a question about that, or an answer that says yes, delete that in some case in Stack Overflow. So somebody asked, oh, I have a hanging parsing process. So I started and suddenly something hangs, and the advice that was accepted was maybe something with the parser is wrong, go and delete the cache, the parsing cache of a bitbake, and it was accepted. By the way, it was accepted maybe because of the reason that the person who answered the question, this was the question, the person who answered the question is the same guy who asked the question. This is quite a common practice in Stack Overflow. You have a problem, you found the solution, and you want to document that for the community. So it's a one person who said, okay, I had the problem and I find the solution, and that's okay. I think that probably there is something about that. Let's talk a bit about ccache. So, okay, sstate takes care of the artifacts that are built during the bitbake build process. And it is important. It is powerful. So why should we consider adding another layer of caching? So ccache is an open source caching solution that catches any call to the C++ compiler. It works well with G++ and Clang. It says that it should work also with MSVC. Our experience is that it works, maybe not perfectly, but with G++ and Clang, it works perfectly. It works pretty well. It works on the compilation level on a single compilation unit, on a single file, but does that pretty well. I mean, it doesn't look at an artifact or a target. It looks, the target is the simple single file, which is important for our case. And you can share the cache between users and on shared folder or build server. This is the link to ccache. Why do we need yet another cache project to use with Yocto? Would it help us? Would it have any value? Well, The sstate-cache requires a rigorous definition of dependencies. While this is already done for baseline Yocto, we see some of a user base not maintaining this well in their recipes. So if you have an issue, it might be that somehow, for some reason, your sstate doesn't cache your artifacts well for your recipe. The right way to go would be to go and amend your recipe to declare your dependencies correctly. But till you do that, it might be that you would get value from an additional caching level on the compilation file, on the single compilation unit. So this may be caused by the user's own code or by inheriting from a recipe from a third party. And again, you should maintain that, but in some cases, either it is quite hard or you do not have time to do that, or things just move around. You have too many moving parts. So we find users that choose the path of least resistance, and they just throw big machines on the build, and they go with a full rebuild. We call it a full rebuild with a double O. Don't do that. I mean, you do not want to spend the entire time for the full rebuild each time. You should go for decent caching, sstate, and make sure that it should work for you. But at the same time, if you add ccache to your solution, it would at least catch the compilation on the compilation unit, on the single file, and save you from additional compilations, which are not all the relevant tasks. I mean, there are other tasks that need sstate. Don't throw away sstate, use it. But for that case, okay, at least for the compilation, many of the artifacts would gain the ccache ability for saving us from rebuild of these compilation units. Another issue that we see is that when build is aborted, as discussed before, either by out of memory or it was canceled by Jenkins' job for a certain reason, or we just canceled it, we see that the state might be saved in an inconsistent state. And again, it's not something that should happen or always happens. It's something that we do see. And then it might be that you try again, you see issues, and you clean the state. And then when you clean the state, you just lose the entire compilation that you had before, while the object files were okay. You could use the object files. So in such a case, again, the user needs to clean state, while I should be able to still use the object files themselves if they are available, and I prefer them to be available. We see that docompile composes about 50% of the task time and even more. So the potential here is to gain back up to around 50% or more of your build time. So letting ccache handle that as a fallback is quite useful. Our added spice in Incredibuild. Throwing ccache into the party is useful, but it might not be too fun because managing configurations and amending all recipes to use ccache is quite cumbersome. Now, someone can think of, okay, so what I have to do is just to change the way that I run the compiler and say, okay, when you try to run the compiler, just make it run ccache, and then from there to compiler. But it is not so easy doing that because if you remember, Bitbake runs hundreds of instances of Clang, G++, of all sorts of versions, and some of them are the same, but they do not come from the same folder. So at the end, it is not so easy to catch the call to the compiler. And if you are going to do that manually in order to integrate ccache into your solution, this is quite cumbersome. Our solution configures it transparently for you. So you just have to use the Incredibuild build system, and you get the ccache as part of this build process without any need to touch your recipes or configuration files, which is important. And again, I must say that I'm not coming here to sell you Incredibuild. I mean, I am in a way, but you can do that as well, most probably, either manually, not manually by configuring your files, but writing a relevant script or using other solutions. But you have to bear in mind that having ccache on the compilation level, on the file, on the compilation unit, can be contributing. To summarize.
Can we, yeah, let's wrap it up.
Caching is almost crucial when building Yocto. Understanding and troubleshooting caching is required skill. Otherwise, you would lose your caching. Adding ccache as compiler caching layer can be useful. Using Rebel would configure ccache for you with zero effort. So you may want to check that. You can talk with us. And that's it. These are the links of Incredible and Yocto. And again, go watch the Cache French movie, 2005, and you would understand why cache is a bit creepy. But it works. It should work. Use it. Thank you.